News: a New York jury has found the Trump Organization guilty of tax fraud.
Prosecutors say the company benefited from a 15-year scheme that provided off-the-book benefits to top executives. Former CFO Allen Weisselberg pleaded guilty over the summer for his involvement in the scheme. He testified last month that the Trump Organization was aware of the fraud. Former President Trump is not charged in this case, but prosecutors did say during closing arguments that he had knowledge of the scheme.
CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge joins us now. She's been following this case for us from Washington. Catherine, what do you make of this verdict?
Well, it's a very significant verdict. This investigation began back in around 2018. And then it became a formal criminal trial in the fall of this year, and the juries only had the evidence and this complex set of charges for 2 days before reaching this decision. At the heart of this case, this was about tax fraud, and the allegation was that Trump executives were enriched while at the same time they were reducing their tax liability. So, for example, if an executive received a holiday bonus, that bonus would be paid to them not as an employee of the company, but as an independent contractor because it allowed them to pay less tax on it. In addition, there were perks such as apartments, chauffeurs, car services. All of this should have been declared as income, but the jurors found that it was not properly declared, and it was the basis of the tax fraud charges.
Catherine, you mentioned, among other things, the rent being paid by the Trump Organization. Right. That was one of the things that we saw the prosecutors actually point a finger at the former president on, because he had signed one of the leases that they presented. Tell to us a little bit more about former CFO Allen Weisselberg and his guilty plea and his testimony factoring into this case and what he had to say about the former president.
Well, Allen Weisselberg is not a household name, but he was the CFO or chief executive officer for the Trump Organization. So he was the top money man when it came to the accounts payable. And he pled guilty to a number of counts earlier this year. And in response to that guilty plea, there was an agreement that he would testify at this trial. I believe it was for approximately 3 days. So he was able to walk jurors through the mechanics of how it worked. And you're quite right to point out that a number of these checks, especially those of high dollar amounts, were signed off on by former President Trump, who at that time was the executive of the Trump Organization. I want to emphasize that Allen Weisselberg was never seen by the prosecution as a cooperating witness, that this testimony was secured as part of an agreement that saw him commit to jail time, probation, as well as a very significant financial penalty.
Well, for those of you who are joining us right now, we have breaking news. The Trump Organization has been declared guilty on all 17 counts that are related to tax fraud. Catherine Herridge is with us, just breaking down what this all mean. And Catherine, during closing arguments, as you mentioned, the prosecutor suggested that Trump was basically in on it, that he sanctioned the fraud by assigning checks. What are the ramifications of this verdict for former President Trump? Is there anything that can follow that can directly impact him?
It's an excellent question. I think there are kind of two ways to look at this. Number one, the finding in this case really strengthens the position of the New York Attorney General Letitia James,